Kirby's Dream Land did not only establish one of the most iconic Nintendo series we know today, but set the stone of many memorable rivalries. During the short playtime you encounter many foes still appearing to this day, one of them being the one-eyed thundercloud Kracko. While not as present as King Dedede or Wispy Woods, which we already ranked on this channel, he still cemented himself as one of Kirby's antagonistic all-stars throughout the years. Because of that, let's appreciate his persistency and find out which Kracko battle impressed the most. Starting rather mild, Star Allies Kracko representation didn't knock me out of my chair, but was convincing enough to warrant a placement on this ranking. Moreover, it's a culmination of the standard battle and the parallel counterpart, which result in a more than competent confrontation. The first half is quite creative, with Kracko splitting himself up and emphasizing the multiplayer of the game. Everyone gets a more than big enough target to attack and at the same time can make use of the elemental power. When Kracko performs his shower skill, you can either deal more damage by electricizing the water or even better, completely freeze it, therefore making Kracko unable to move. This basically ends the battle in an instant, but looks extremely entertaining and a fitting wink for everyone who paid attention to the mechanics of the game. The second half starts on the opposite spectrum, as you have to battle Twin Kracko first before entering the second phase. Here, both clouds combine themselves to one massive colossus. There are only very few places left to hide, as the purple thundercloud nearly covers the whole battleground with almost all his attacks. One new addition are little thunderclouds in combination with pushing you back, and because shielding still takes damage when coming into contact, you have to decide to play risky and dodge or remain in defense, taking certain damage. There might not be a specific moment that left me in awe, but overall Star Allies is a conclusive rendition that makes perfect use of the game's specialities. A battle some people might not even be aware of exists. On paper, Venom Krakow is actually the EX counterpart of standard Kracko in Super Kirby Clash, but the regular version offers a very basic fare and is not worth talking about. Because of that, you may argue Venom Krakow is fairly similar in that case, but what I enjoy about this specific battle is the potential and idea behind the concept. Very rarely is Kracko mixed up with some kind of element to shake up his appearance, and by landing him a poisonous touch, he gets the options to spice up most of his arsenal. Toxic trash and noxious gases accompany nearly every ability, and despite the fact this comes from a mere free spin-off, it shows much more potential than most mainline titles. Of course, there's much more to do with the venomous Kracko, and time will only tell if they're going to revisit this concept again, but right now Venom Krakow stands as one of the most interesting, yet a little too plain confrontations in the series. Fitting to its respective setting, Triple Deluxe hijacks Kirby to the skies and follows the traces of Taranza, a powerful spider able to summon the strongest foes out of mere elements. One of those is Kracko, the first time this cloudy nemesis in a modern title. If you have watched my Wispy Woods ranking, then you're probably aware about my disappointment how safe his appearance in Return to Dreamland turned out to be. Luckily, I cannot claim the same for this encounter, as Kracko is accurately translated into the strengths of the 3DS, with all sorts of fast-paced, classic and new techniques. At first, the battle starts rather tame, but once you halve his energy, Kracko storms himself up and reveals the background as his playground. By preparing a mighty thunderbolt, it's required to immediately switch the layers and continue to clash between those steps. On top of that, culminating his little spikes and dashing with them through the arena covers both fore and background and makes up for intimidating visuals. Before, every boss hid it in the background, but Kracko is one of the very few bosses in this game to let you enter it, bringing in a certain exciting dynamic. One small detail that many people are not aware of is how the game subtly makes the battle easier in case you die too often. The little gaps lend themselves perfectly to instantly end you, especially after taking a hit and falling right into it. If this happens too often, those gaps will be closed, making life a little more bearable. I was a little surprised, but Krakow's little entrance in Kirby's Blood Blast is unexpectedly convincing. After experimenting with traditional Kirby gameplay in three-dimensional space for the first time, the creators also used the opportunity to see how bosses would make that shift. The very first Kirby's Dream Land was used as a foundation and therefore most of its enemies as well. Although Wispy Woods was cut, Kracko is one of the flexible bosses of this game and was perfectly realized on the first try. Theoretically, none of his attacks are special in particular. Every move portrays some sort of skill we have already seen before, but it would be unfair to judge this battle in terms of a full mainline title. What we get instead is a surprisingly action-packed fray in a small arena, making use of the whole arena and throwing out thunders wherever there is space. My favorite move, however, is covering the whole scenery in dark clouds, only showing his angry eyeball. What I like to see in good Wispy battles is making use of the arena, since the tree itself is stationary and has to find other ways to make a fight dynamic. When we are talking about Kracko though, his stormy abilities are often left underutilized, and making use of his body structure, which can turn into all shapes and forms, is something I already praised in Triple Deluxe. Before diving into the first placement, let's honor a certain other fight which didn't make it into the mix. Logically, Kirby's Epigan offers no Kracko battle in the regular sense, just like Wispy Woods only appearing in one of the stages of the final world. This does not mean you cannot at least give him a small shout out, as this Yarn Kracko might not be as action-packed as other bosses on this list, but remains still quite charming. Not only does he chases you through one of the stages before, but ends up in a shmup section traditional for Kirby titles. His yarnification gives off a very uncanny, almost soulless impression, and I'm glad they didn't forget to implement him to some extent. Navigating through a twisted underground maze to find the greatest treasure of all, Kirby is in constant chase against the Squeak Squad, a group of cheesy bandits with only one goal in mind: treasures. Because of that, you encounter most of the main cast even during levels and have to watch out to keep all the chests you collected. This competition is naturally reflected during the boss fights, where the brain of the gang, Doc, enters giant mechs much stronger than anything faced off so far. While technically not Kracko himself, this robotic imitation takes place in a stormy cloud and recontextualizes the traditional battle against the one-eyed cloud. The setup is already more than fitting enough, as the moving dark background sets the mood in combination with Robot Krakow's similarly murky fog. At first, nothing about this clash seems outstanding, as the fight follows well-established Kracko patterns with some thunderbolts or dropping enemies in order to strike you. You would initially think this is simply a mechanical construction of Kirby's old rival, but once you eliminate the first phase, Doc reveals himself for a brief moment, showing the true enemy behind this machine. The little exposure is a nice touch and logical way to implement the mice even as a boss fight. To some extent, Doc's intelligence lends itself perfectly to create all sorts of industrial monstrosities, and I'm glad the title-leading antagonists are so present throughout every part of the game. Continuing with the brawl itself, the second phase becomes much more dangerous by creating holes beneath your feet and sometimes even requiring Kirby to float for a little while. Initially, it's not a remarkable implementation, but incorporating the floating as a necessity to survive is something the series rarely makes use of, let alone during a boss, simultaneously adding tension to the whole ordeal. The pattern of how Robot Krakow destroys the ground is random, but simply having bottomless pits in this conflict creates the air of risk, and it becomes much harder to keep your lost abilities. Naturally, there's some options and skills to have a cakewalk, but nonetheless, Robot Krakow remains as the most impressive Kracko battle to this day, despite not even being Kracko. But it's a mecha version, so 1 million extra points. As you have probably noticed, there weren't too many honorable mentions unlike with Wispy Woods. This is due to the fact that, just like with the placement itself, it feels like Kracko still doesn't unfold his true potential. There are much more wispy encounters, but I regard them as way more creative, and especially in the past, Kracko clashes often simply copied their previous battle design completely. This is not to say they lack in creativity, but could make use of much more features, as Venom or Robot Kracko proved. Since our favorite Cloud didn't make an appearance in Kirby and the Forgotten Land, there's a high chance to meet him once again in the next mainline 3D title. And going by how they improve on him step by step, there's no doubt a great storm is ahead.